I grew up in a modest family. My father was a stonemason. My mother worked various part-time jobs, including cleaning, and yet we never lacked necessities. They always did everything possible to ensure our home had everything we needed. We weren't wealthy, but I never heard my parents complain. They believed honest work was all a person needed for a peaceful life. I recall my father's hands, rough with calluses and cuts from handling cement and bricks. He left for work before sunrise, and often I was already asleep when he returned. My mother was different. Despite her exhaustion, she always wore a smile. She used to say her smile was to mask the world's weariness. That phrase has always stayed with me. From a young age, I dreamed of becoming a civil engineer. I think it was my father's example that sparked this ambition in me. He erected walls with such care. He seemed an artist, but he never had the chance to study. I wanted to be the one who designed the houses he built. That was my way of repaying all his hard work. When I was accepted into the engineering program, it was the happiest day of my parents' lives. My father opened a beer, a rare occurrence as he rarely spent money on luxuries, and toasted to me being the first engineer in our family. My mother embraced me so tightly I felt my ribs crack, but I said nothing. I knew how much it meant to them. College wasn't easy. I had no time for parties or social outings. My days were filled with classes, and my nights were spent reviewing projects or helping around the house. My parents never asked, but I knew. They needed my help, and I wanted more than anything to honor their sacrifices. Over time, the weight of responsibility grew heavier. Sometimes, lying in my small, time-worn room, I wondered if I could achieve all my aspirations. It was a mixture of fear and hope, but I always returned to that thought. I couldn't fail, I couldn't disappoint. Everything seemed so clear, so certain. My goal was simple: graduate, secure a good job, and lift my parents from their grueling routine, to give them the home they always dreamed of, perhaps a car, and who knows, a more relaxed life. In that moment, that was all I wanted. I believed that with effort and dedication, anything was possible. I had no idea that the path I chose to achieve this would lead me to places I could never have imagined. Landing an internship at a large construction company was like winning the lottery for me. It seemed like a distant possibility for someone like me, but I managed to secure it. I remember the exact moment I received the call. I was sitting in the living room, reviewing a college project, and nearly dropped the phone from my nervousness. When the woman on the other end said I was selected, my heart raced. My first day felt like a dream. The company was enormous, with modern offices, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, and a breathtaking view of the city. As I walked through the pristine corridors, I felt like I had taken the first step towards something great. I met other interns, some as nervous as I was, but most already accustomed to the environment. My schedule was intense, but I didn't complain. I woke up early, took 2 buses to get there, and even needed to study in the evenings. Yet each day was a lesson. I learned a lot, from handling projects to the dynamics of the construction industry. I felt I was growing, both professionally and personally. With my first paycheck, I finally bought a used motorcycle. It wasn't new, but it was mine, and that moment was significant. I no longer depended on crowded buses, and that sense of independence was like a glimpse of the future I envisioned for myself. Furthermore, I started dating a girl from college. She was amazing, intelligent, fun, and supportive of me in everything. I felt like my life was finally on track. Work, studies, and someone special by my side. It was as if, after so much effort, things were finally starting to fall into place. But something intrigued me about that company. It wasn't just the luxury enjoyed by the executives with their expensive cars and watches. It was the way they behaved, almost as if they spoke a language of their own. One day, I noticed that everyone wore similar rings with strange symbols, and when they greeted each other, they made coordinated gestures, as if they were part of some kind of ritual. At first, I thought it was all in my head, but the more I observed, the stranger it seemed. I attempted to inquire about this unusual behavior with a colleague, but he merely chuckled and advised me to not worry about it. This evasive response only intensified my curiosity. Occasionally, I observed them departing the company together, always in the evening, impeccably attired, as if headed to a significant event. I lacked any understanding of their activities, but a sense of something substantial and concealed lingered beneath the surface. Despite these suspicions, I remained focused on my work. I needed to excel. Unbeknownst to me, these seemingly minor observations would profoundly alter my life in ways I could never have predicted. It was through careful observation that I began to notice recurring patterns. Initially, these were subtle details, almost imperceptible. The manner in which the construction firm's executives greeted one another with gestures that seemed rehearsed, or the rings they wore, all exhibiting a similar design. These cues were subtle, yet for someone with a keen eye like mine, these consistent patterns were difficult to ignore. The rings were crafted from silver, featuring an etched symbol I had never before encountered. It wasn't an obvious design, such as a star or a circle. Instead, it was a more intricate pattern, resembling intersecting lines forming an almost hypnotic design. I found myself drawn to them, captivated by their enigmatic symbolism. During a meeting, I witnessed one of the executives performing a hand gesture while conversing with another. It was swift, almost imperceptible, but appeared significant, like a discreet signal. Other interns seemed indifferent, yet I found myself intrigued. Why did they engage in these behaviors, and why did only the executives wear these rings? I decided to seek clarification from a more senior colleague. He had been with the company for over 2 years and seemed well versed in the company's inner workings. I waited for a moment when we were alone and, in a casual manner, inquired about the rings. He regarded me for a few moments as if deliberating whether or not to respond, then offered a nervous smile. "You'll discover that there are certain things within these walls that are best left unsaid," he remarked before abruptly changing the subject. This response left me uneasy. Subsequently, I intensified my observations. I noticed that whenever there was a significant meeting, the executives departed together in the evening. They never disclosed their destinations, and no one questioned their movements. I struggled to maintain focus on my work, the unfolding events consuming my attention. It felt as if a major secret was concealed in plain sight, and I alone was aware of it. I attempted to research similar symbols online, but my search yielded only generic images of esoteric symbols, none precisely matching what I had observed. This only amplified my intrigue. On one occasion, late at night, I witnessed 2 executives entering a black car. Their attire suggested a formal occasion. One held a leather briefcase, while the other scanned their surroundings as if verifying that no one was watching. I hid behind a pillar, my heart pounding, and waited until they departed. Despite these observations, I continued to convince myself that it was all coincidence. Perhaps it was some sort of internal company tradition, irrelevant to me. Yet deep down, I knew there was more to the story. Although I still lacked a complete understanding, I sensed that I was approaching a revelation that would profoundly alter my life. My graduation ceremony, which should have been a celebratory moment, instead marked the beginning of one of the most challenging periods of my life. After years of dedicated study, I finally achieved my goal of becoming a civil engineer. My parents were overjoyed. My father meticulously donned the only suit he possessed, an antique model reserved for weddings and special occasions. My mother wept as I received my diploma on stage, and I too struggled to contain my emotions. On that day, I felt that all my efforts had been worthwhile. I was prepared to build a successful career and provide my parents with the life they deserved. With my internship at the prominent construction firm, I believed I was well positioned to achieve this goal. However, reality proved different. A few weeks after my graduation, I was summoned for a meeting with human resources. I envisioned it as a discussion regarding my official employment. I entered the room with a smile, anticipating positive news. Instead, I received a devastating blow. Unfortunately, we won't be able to continue your employment with the company. These words echoed in my mind. I attempted to inquire about the reasons, but the response was vague and generic, as if they had rehearsed their words. They claimed it was a matter of internal restructuring, but I sensed that there was more to the story. I departed from the company, a complex of anger and disappointment swirling within me. How could they discard me so readily after all the effort I had invested in my work? Throughout my internship, I had fulfilled every expectation, toiled diligently, and never complained. I felt betrayed by individuals I had admired and respected. I attempted to contact several supervisors with whom I had rapport, but received no response. Unread messages, ignored calls. It was as if I had ceased to exist. This only intensified my sense of frustration. My girlfriend tried to comfort me, asserting that this was merely a temporary setback, that I would undoubtedly find something better. But for me, it wasn't so simple. I harbored lofty aspirations, and I couldn't envision restarting from scratch. Moreover, I began unknowingly distancing myself from her. I didn't want to reveal my vulnerability, and the more she tried to assist me, the more isolated I became. The worst part was returning home and facing my parents. They didn't demand anything, but I felt the weight of my father's gaze, as if he was silently saying, "I believe in you." Each passing day, I felt as though I was disappointing not only myself, but also the people I cherished most. That period profoundly impacted me. It was then that I began to understand that the path to success wasn't as straightforward as I had imagined. And unknowingly, that feeling of helplessness would be the initial step toward choices that would irrevocably alter my life. After weeks of job searching, met with nothing but rejections, I decided I could no longer wait. My parents, witnessing my escalating frustration, suggested I start my own business. Initially, I hesitated. I knew that establishing a construction company would require a substantial investment, something we lacked. But my parents persisted. "This is your opportunity to build something great, son," my father declared. To fund this aspiration, they sold their car and house. They decided to reside in a small rented apartment to help generate the initial capital. I tried to dissuade them, but deep down, I so desired success that I ultimately agreed. With the funds, I established my construction firm. Initially, hope filled me. The first month was dedicated to organization, paperwork, licenses, and securing a small office in an old city building. My parents assisted as best they could. My mother prepared coffee for the few employees I had hired, and my father helped me connect with industry contacts. Yet, contracts remained elusive. Despite my efforts, it seemed no one was willing to entrust their projects to a new company. I spent countless nights reviewing proposals and contemplating my errors. I understood the competitive nature of the market, but I hadn't anticipated the immense difficulty. Over the ensuing months, expenses mounted. Office rent, salaries, and even promotional materials. My father continued to offer unwavering support, assuring me that everything would be all right, but I detected worry in his eyes. He had sacrificed so much for me, and I felt as though I was jeopardizing it all. My girlfriend, who remained by my side, tried to uplift my spirits. "Things take time," she would say, but eventually, even she began to exhibit weariness. I became more withdrawn, more irritable, and this ultimately affected our relationship. The most challenging moment arrived when I realized I lacked sufficient funds to cover the office rent. I recall sitting on the empty office floor, surrounded by scattered papers, and weeping. I felt like a failure. All I had wanted was to provide a better life for my family, and now it seemed as if I had only brought forth more problems. At that juncture, I began to question everything. Why was it so difficult? I observed other companies in the industry experiencing rapid growth, securing lucrative contracts. Some were run by individuals with less experience than myself. So I started to ponder, what was their secret? It was this reflection that led me down a path from which I could never return. In that moment of despair, I was prepared to do anything to alter the situation. I'd reached a point where nothing made sense anymore. I was overwhelmed by debt, the concerned gazes of my parents, and the frustration of failing to establish my construction company. It was then that I began to hear rumors, whispers about how some of the largest construction companies in the region had achieved such rapid growth. What I heard sounded preposterous, but in my desperation, I began to consider them. Have you heard of so-and-so? He owns one of those major construction firms. Everyone knows he made a deal, a friend casually mentioned during an informal conversation. My amusement at the time was quickly overshadowed by the lingering impact of those words. Days later, a similar remark surfaced, prompting a gnawing question. What if it were true? I recall the precise night everything shifted. Alone in my home, fixated on the wall, I felt an urgent need for answers. I subtly inquired about these stories, and eventually someone revealed a man who facilitated agreements. He's a priest, but not the kind you imagine, they whispered. Driven by curiosity, I sought him out on a rainy evening. The house, nestled in a secluded area, was small and encircled by trees. A shiver ran down my spine as I knocked on the door. A man in a dark robe opened it. His eyes, profound and seemingly perceptive, held my gaze. He smiled, but the expression lacked warmth. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone direct, as if already knowing my purpose. My voice trembled as I recounted my predicament. He listened intently, only occasionally nodding his head. When I finished, he stood and led me into a dimly lit room, illuminated solely by candles. The ritual that followed defied my expectations. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. He compelled me to repeat unfamiliar words while sketching symbols on the floor with dark powder. At one point, an inexplicable warmth enveloped me, as if an unseen flame burned my skin. Whispers, voices seemingly emanating from everywhere, filled the air, and my heart pounded. "It is done," he declared, his tone flat, as if handing over a receipt. "Now you shall receive what you desire. But remember, everything has a price." He handed me a paper containing instructions and dismissed me. Leaving the house, I felt as if I had abandoned something, but remained uncertain of what. Subsequent days brought no change. I yearned for a shift, a sign, but everything remained unchanged. Each morning, I questioned the reality of the experience, wondering if it was a delusion born of desperation. It felt as though nothing had altered. Nearly a month passed, and still no tangible change. I remained trapped in the same cycle of debt, lacking contracts, and burdened by a sense of deception. I was starting to believe the entire encounter a cheap trick when a knock echoed on my door. A grey morning found me in my small office, attempting to sort through trivial documents. Opening the door, I saw a man standing there. Young, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, he exuded confidence. His face, perfectly symmetrical, seemed sculpted, and his eyes, a deep azure, held my gaze captive. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I hope I'm not interrupting." I nodded, slightly dazed, and invited him in. He entered, surveyed the room, and with a subtle smile, introduced himself. "I'm a representative from a construction firm in the neighboring city. We have a project that might interest your company." As he spoke, he presented a folder containing what appeared to be a public bid for a significant construction project, a large housing complex. The scope of the project was far beyond anything I had ever undertaken. My disbelief was palpable. "Why my company?" I inquired, attempting to mask my apprehension. He smiled again. "Let's just say you were recommended by the right person." He paused. "The Lord believes you possess the necessary potential for this work." My heart pounded. Everything clicked into place. The Lord. He didn't need to explain who he was. I knew. I composed myself as I reviewed the documents. Everything was in order. It was a legitimate contract, free of loopholes or hidden traps, precisely what I needed to save my company, and perhaps my life. Yet a profound weight settled over me, as if I were about to step through a door that could never be closed. The man provided all the necessary instructions, explaining how to submit the project and that the contract was virtually assured. All I had to do was follow the plan. Before leaving, he looked at me with a smile that concealed something. "Don't worry, the Lord is taking care of everything." After he departed, I sat in my office for hours, clutching the folder. It felt like a dream, yet the weight in my chest confirmed its reality. I knew this moment was the outcome of the agreement I had made. Despite the momentary relief, a part of me couldn't help but wonder, what would be the price? I proceeded with the project, according to the mysterious young man's instructions. Every detail was meticulously followed, and as he had promised, the contract was finalized. That week, my life underwent a complete transformation. The project was colossal, boasting a multi-million-dollar budget, and propelled me into the spotlight of major construction firms. For the first time, I felt like everything was finally falling into place. As the construction progressed, my company began to flourish. I hired more staff, leased a larger office space, and finally started seeing significant revenue. It was almost surreal. I attended meetings with influential business people, participated in exclusive events, and was treated with respect. Individuals who had previously ignored my emails now sought personal encounters. Yet, despite this remarkable progress, something felt amiss. Initially, the anomalies were subtle, a persistent sense of being watched, as if someone was always nearby. Back home, objects seemed to shift positions. A mug, which I was certain I had left on the sink, would reappear on the table. Pictures hung crooked on the walls, even though no one had touched them. Subsequently, sounds emerged, faint whispers barely audible, which I initially attributed to my imagination. At night, alone in the office, I would hear footsteps echoing from the hallway, only to find no one there. I tried to dismiss these occurrences, but it proved impossible. Moreover, the priest contacted me. He appeared in my office, as if he possessed precise knowledge of my location. He settled into the chair opposite me, maintaining his composed demeanor and penetrating gaze. "Congratulations on your success," he stated, "but you must understand that everything comes at a price." He explained that from then on, I was obligated to allocate a portion of my company's profits to him. There was no room for debate, no opportunity for negotiation. It was a clear demand, and the firmness in his voice made it evident that non-compliance would be perilous. I did not inquire about the destination of the funds, simply acquiesced, devoid of the strength to challenge him. My personal life began to unravel. The distance between me and my girlfriend became insurmountable. She claimed I was consumed by work, that I had changed. And she was right. I was no longer the same person. I had no time left for her or anyone else. My nights were a blend of Work and apprehension. The weight of everything began to crush me. Despite my attempts to convince myself that I was finally on the right path, I knew this was abnormal. My success had arrived too swiftly, too easily, and the feeling that I had lost something invaluable persisted. The project was completed on schedule, and the construction firm received public praise. However, behind the smile I wore at meetings, there was an emptiness. Because, despite the influx of money, the consequences of the agreement were already manifesting. A few weeks after the project's completion, I received an unexpected invitation. It was a letter delivered by a messenger who appeared at my home mid-afternoon. The envelope was black, bearing an embossed seal reminiscent of the ring insignia, worn by the construction firm's executives. Inside, there was a single sentence: "You have been summoned to the circle," and a date, time, and location. The designated venue was outside the city, a secluded mansion perched atop a hill. Upon my arrival, the first thing I noticed was the absolute silence. There was no sound of cars or animals. It was as if the world around me had ceased. The mansion was immense, with tall windows and dim lights casting long shadows on the floor. I was greeted by a man who seemed to know my identity. Without a word, he led me to a spacious room with dark wooden walls and a massive chandelier that appeared to weigh tons. Around an oval table sat other business people. Some I recognized. From industry events, others were complete strangers. They greeted me with cold smiles and scrutinizing gazes. I observed that each individual wore the same rings I had previously seen. The priest was also present, seated at the head of the table, exuding an air of superiority that appeared to command everything. The meeting commenced with seemingly ordinary conversation about business and contracts, but the tone soon shifted. One of the businessmen began to discuss obligations and commitments. Another mentioned the Lord and how he was always watching. I remained silent, attempting to absorb everything without revealing how uncomfortable I felt. It was then that I realized the true purpose of the gathering. Those men and women were not simply there to discuss business. They were discussing the price of their agreements, the challenges of upholding their promises, and the repercussions of failing. One of them, visibly distressed, confessed that his life was unraveling due to his failure to fulfill his obligations. The assembled individuals exhibited neither surprise nor empathy. Only the priest, observing me with a nearly sadistic smile, remained unmoved. As he spoke, a mixture of fascination and dread washed over me. I was unsure whether to feel relief at being part of this group or terror at realizing my success was tethered to the same constraints that bound them. Each member had attained wealth and power, but it was evident they paid a heavy price. When the meeting concluded, the priest approached me. "Congratulations," he declared. "You are now a member of the inner circle." He presented me with a ring. The metal felt cold against my skin, and a shiver coursed through me as I grasped it. That evening, driving home, my mind was besieged by questions. Who were these people truly? How far did the terms of this agreement extend? And most importantly, what would happen if I wished to withdraw? Something shifted within me after the meeting. Despite my company's continued growth and an unprecedented influx of funds, the weight of the pact grew heavier. It wasn't merely the financial obligations to the priest or the ring now permanently on my finger. It was something deeper. A sense that I had lost a fundamental part of myself. My nights became restless. I lay in bed, but sleep eluded me. I felt as though something was watching me, always present in the shadows of my room. Sometimes I heard whispers, as if voices were conversing, but they ceased as soon as I stirred. Other times I awoke in the middle of the night, convinced someone had touched my shoulder. My relationship with my parents also altered. They rejoiced in my prosperity, yet I avoided close contact. I feared that something from this shadowy world might harm them. My father inquired about my well-being, and I responded with platitudes about the demands of my work. My mother's concerned gaze, unique to a mother's affection, remained unspoken. One day, I visited their home. It was a brief visit, merely to deliver promised funds for rent. As my mother embraced me, I sensed a moment of hesitation, as if she perceived a change in me. "Are you all right, son?" she asked. For the first time, I couldn't lie. I simply nodded, averting my gaze. I began attending church, a practice entirely foreign to my routine. I sat in the back pews, unsure of what I sought, yet each time I entered, an inexplicable weight settled upon me, as if the air thickened. I even attempted to speak with a priest, but at the last minute, I changed my mind. I knew the path I had chosen was irreversible, and even if it were, what would be the cost? My girlfriend, who had struggled to maintain contact, finally relinquished. "You're not the same person anymore," she declared before departing for the final time, and she was right. I was different. With each contract signed, with each new success, I felt further removed from the person I once was. The boy who dreamed of being an engineer to support his parents seemed a distant memory, yet a part of me couldn't ignore the achievements I had attained. For the first time in my life, I possessed financial stability, recognition, and the capacity to provide a better life for my parents. But the cost of all this remained ever present, a shadow I couldn't escape. I began questioning my limits. How much more could I endure before losing myself entirely? These questions tormented me, but the answers remained elusive. The weight of the pact seemed to intensify daily. Despite my company's success and the financial security I craved, something gnawed at my peace. During another meeting of the circle, I realized the path I had chosen held dangers I hadn't anticipated. The gathering took place in a different location, a mansion even more isolated than the previous one, enveloped by dense woods. Entering, I felt the same oppressive weight in the air, as if the place itself was imbued with something beyond my comprehension. The room was smaller this time, illuminated solely by candelabras. The faces of those around me were partially obscured by shadows. The priest began to speak, his voice firm and hypnotic. He discussed the obligations of each member, the importance of adherence to instructions, and the need to remain steadfast on the path laid out by the master. But the atmosphere of the meeting was different. A palpable unease permeated the air, as if something was spiraling out of control. A poignant encounter occurred during a business meeting, one that would irrevocably alter the course of my life. A senior figure, visibly distressed, requested to speak. His voice, trembling with apprehension, recounted a failure to remit a portion of his company's profits to the presiding cleric. He explained that a crucial contract had fallen through, preventing him from fulfilling his obligation. He pleaded for forgiveness, vowing to rectify the situation to the best of his ability. The cleric, maintaining an unyielding composure, offered a chillingly calm response. His voice, though soft, held an undeniable authority. "You forged a pact," he stated, "and pacts have consequences." The room fell silent, not a single soul daring to interrupt. The distressed businessman attempted to defend himself, but his words were cut short by an unsettling sound, a sharp crackle. The central candelabra began to sway, and the air grew heavy with an ominous presence. Something profound was unfolding. Suddenly, the man let out a blood-curdling scream, clutching his chest as if in the throes of a heart attack. All eyes were riveted on him as he collapsed to the floor. The cleric remained impassive, his unsettling smile unwavering as the man ceased to move. A profound silence descended upon the room, a palpable stillness. No one stirred, no one uttered a word. It was as if everyone instinctively understood the inevitable. The cleric then turned his gaze towards us, his demeanor shifting to an unnerving serenity. "Let this serve as a reminder," he declared. "The Lord bestows, but also takes away. Fulfill your obligations, and you shall receive what you desire. Fail, and you shall pay the price." The image of that meeting haunted me relentlessly as I journeyed home. I knew this encounter was more than a mere warning. It was a stark admonition that no one was above the pact. The man had paid the ultimate price for his failure, and I understood that the same fate could befall me if I strayed from my obligations. A chilling dread settled over me, a constant companion. I didn't know the extent to which the pact could reach, but I knew there was no escape. The price of success was far greater than I had imagined, and with each passing day I felt a growing sense of unease as I ventured further into the inner workings of this exclusive circle. Following that gathering, my life took a dramatic turn. My construction firm flourished, securing ever larger contracts, accumulating wealth beyond my wildest dreams. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. I was the epitome of the successful young entrepreneur, admired by all. But deep down, I knew I was living a silent nightmare. With each contract signed, with each project completed, I felt a part of myself slipping away, becoming detached from my true self. The weight of the pact clung to me relentlessly. Even in my home, the silence seemed to speak to me, and despite my outward success, I felt utterly alone. The whispers I heard at night grew more frequent. Sometimes voices seemed to converse amongst themselves, murmuring things I couldn't understand. Other times I felt as if something or someone was watching me. It was a constant reminder that what I possessed was not truly mine. My parents, proud of my accomplishments, found it increasingly difficult to engage with me. I kept them at arm's length, fearing that if they truly understood the world I now inhabited, they would never comprehend it. I provided for them financially, but maintained a deliberate distance. I knew that if they discovered the truth, they would never understand. At times, I wondered if I had the courage to break free. But after witnessing the events of that meeting, I knew there was no escape. The pact was an enduring commitment, an unbreakable bond. The price of success was clear, and despite achieving everything I had ever dreamed of, the cost was my peace, my freedom, and perhaps even my soul. Today, my construction firm continues to thrive. I continue to sign contracts, attend meetings, and maintain the facade of success. But every time I close my eyes, I see the image of that man from the meeting, collapsing on the floor as the cleric watched impassively. It's a memory that refuses to leave me. Sometimes I find myself contemplating, what if I had chosen a different path? What if I had accepted failure, sought an honest way out? Perhaps my life would have been simpler, but I would have been free. Now it's too late for such reflections. All that remains is to move forward, to fulfill my obligations, and to hope that the price doesn't escalate. And that is why I say, be wary of what you desire, because success, when it comes easily, can conceal a price you are unprepared to pay. And remember, evil never stays far away. It always finds its way back.